And joining us now is Mike Sommers, CEO of the American Petroleum Institute, the US's biggest oil and gas lobby group. Great to have you with us, Mike, on the show. A distraction? A distraction from what? What do you think the US government's doing here?
Julia, great to be with you. I do think it is a distraction. When you think about the fact that this administration started 11 months ago talking about what they wanted to do to put a cut into the American oil industry by shutting down the Keystone XL pipeline, by shutting off permitting and leasing on federal lands, and by shutting down the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge as a source of oil as well. This administration from the very beginning has been saying they don't want domestic oil production in the United States. And so the distraction that they're putting forward now, this FTC investigation, we think is a distraction from the policies that they themselves have put into place. This is what administrations do when they've pursued policies that are cutting back on American energy innovation. And we think that what they really should be focused on is how we get American production back online, which will benefit American consumers and the world as well.
So you're saying the US government's directly responsible for the high prices that US consumers in particular are facing today?
Well, there are, of course, very many factors here, but certainly when an administration has put a focus on ensuring that the American oil and gas industry isn't producing and doing everything they can to stop production in the United States, that certainly is going to be a factor weighing on American oil companies' desires to continue domestic production. So it's something that we're watching and something that we want to continue to engage the administration on. In fact, just this week, there was a lease sale in the Gulf of Mexico, the first lease sale in the Gulf of Mexico. And that lease sale only occurred because a trial judge in the state of Louisiana said that it had to occur. And the administration, instead of encouraging that development in the Gulf of Mexico, was disappointed that they had to pursue this lease sale. So when those are the kind of signals given to American producers, you can only imagine what the response is going to be, a lack of investment and higher prices for American and world consumers.
You know, it's interesting. What I hear particularly from the money management industry, is that they're under pressure, so they're not giving loans and money to the shale industry. Banks are obviously very focused on meeting ESG targets, and they're afraid of so-called stranded assets. So they're also pulling back on monies to the oil and the gas sector, the energy sector. And there's quite a lot of alarm coming from them that we are going through a transition. And even if they believe in that transition, and you can debate that from your position too, we're doing it too quickly. We're not creating a bridge to utilize oil and gas that we need in terms of energy in order to buy us time to invest in a renewable future. And that will mean higher prices in the short term. Mike, do you agree with that premise that we could see significantly higher prices in the short term? And if so, how high? What is the oil and gas sector telling you based on how they're not investing?
Julia, it's a great question and a huge concern, because the International Energy Agency actually suggests that we need to be investing about $500 billion in new investment every single year into the oil and gas sector to maintain what we expect is going to be future growth and need for oil and gas. And those numbers just aren't measuring up. It's under $300 billion for this last year in terms of the investment that is going to be needed. And what that means is that consumer prices are going to continue to go up. We all know that there is an energy transition going on, but we also have to keep in mind that we need to keep consumer prices low, or that transition is only going to slow down. So we think that the United States should continue to be the world leader in oil and gas production, because we know, based on statistics, that this is the place where oil and gas is produced in the most environmentally responsible way. And so we think that it is better for the world to be getting oil and gas from the United States, because we know that the world is going to continue to demand oil and gas. In fact, that same agency, the International Energy Agency, suggests that even if every country meets their goals under the Paris Climate Accord, almost 50% of the world's energy is going to still come from oil and gas in 2040. So we know that the world's going to consume and need oil and gas. The question is where it's going to come from. And we think it should come from the United States, which has a stable government, and we produce oil and gas in the most environmentally responsible way.
Well, and there is the key. Mike, there will be people watching this saying, you will say anything and do anything to protect the interests of the sector. The IMF is saying that $11 million a minute goes to subsidise oil and gas. You guys are getting enough, and we're in a period now of transition where, even as the American Petroleum Institute, you have to recognise that the next 10 years are going to be materially different from the last 100 years. Do you accept that? And are you best protecting the interest of your members in terms of that transition by talking to them about investing in alternative assets today, even if we have to protect the interests of utilising oil and gas, at least in the short term? Mike, are you ready for the next 10 years? Is the industry ready? Because I think as far as consumers are concerned, at least in the short term, eyes are on a renewable future.
Well, there's no question that in the future, American consumers, world consumers, are going to be demanding more renewables. At the same time, you're going to need oil and gas to back those renewables up. And particularly from the natural gas perspective, you need natural gas to back up windmills and solar when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. So we're going to continue to have to invest in these resources, even if more renewables come online. There is no industry that is investing more in new renewable technology than the oil and gas industry. And in addition to that, the American Petroleum Institute has a plan called the Climate Action Framework that addresses what we need to do to meet the needs of a changing climate. And that includes, by the way, an endorsement of a federal price on carbon in the United States. So we're working with lawmakers now to address what that energy future is going to look like, because we know that consumers are going to be demanding both oil and gas and more renewables within the power sector. But we also have to keep in mind that world population is expected to go up significantly by 2050, by almost 2 billion people. And they're going to be demanding more energy, not less. And most of that energy is going to continue to come from oil and gas. We think it should come from the United States. And that's what we're advancing here with our climate policies.
Mike, and very quickly, to go and circle back to where we began, the idea that the oil and gas industry is in some way colluding to raise prices to benefit themselves at this moment, is your message to the US president on that? That's rubbish.
Well, it's an absurd accusation. And every time we have gone through an investigation like this, and by the way, they've done investigations like this since World War I, it has been proven that this is a supply and demand imbalance, not some kind of imbalance that has occurred as a consequence of collusion. So I think the administration, instead of focusing on asking OPEC to produce more oil, instead of doing needless investigations, they should be working with the oil and gas industry on ways that we can produce more oil in the United States and not be putting a wet blanket on development in this country.
This show's all about balancing so far, the delicate balancing act. Mike, it's always great to get your insights. Thank you. Mike Sommers, CEO of the American Petroleum Institute. We're speaking